Is that power? I mean, as a journalist, are you afraid that you might not have a job because everyone's become a journalist? What do you think? What's special about you? Come on, tell us.
Other than my extraordinary good looks, which...
Yeah, of course.
That speaks the truth, you know, that's journalism.
Okay.
Well done.
I think broadcast journalism is faring up a little bit better. The license fee is still there. People still watch, the television news, and it's still funded in the same way that it was before, with the difference that the World Service is not going to have the license fee. The specialist papers are holding up. The Financial Times increased its circs. The Economist has been doing extraordinarily well. So I think if you're able to provide specialist information...
So like a niche market they're looking after.
Print is not doing that well. The Guardian put a lot of their eggs in the basket of expanding into America and Australia. That hasn't really worked out for them. When it was actually the Guardian America that broke the first Snowden-related stories.
Really?
And when they rang the National Security Council press spokesman and said, "We're going to run this story, we'd like a response, please." Apparently the reply within the NSC was, "What is the Guardian? Is it a blog?" There was a day when people running through the White House and the Security Council staff used to have studied in the UK, and they might know what a UK newspaper looks like. But at the moment,
It looks like.
America sort of cut itself off for its principal cultural relationship over the long term. But looking back at India, at the moment India has got more mobile phones than it has toilets.
It's true.
Yes.
Yeah, but you can't shit in a phone.
I didn't see it. I mean, it's interesting when Netanyahu, we've never actually been accustomed to seeing as a liberal, where he's reining in the IDF, who at this point are sort of pushing for maximal rights of access to Gaza, and you have a ceasefire where the were the ceasefire to have been extended and were finally to be a settlement to end this, the Palestinian side is saying, with some justification that they're holding out for an end to the sea blockade. The Israeli army are holding out for further rights of ground access to Gaza, which even after they've destroyed the tunnels, which was their sensible reason for going in. And then you've sort of got Netanyahu who is listening very hard to the voice of the Israeli right at the moment, and the Israeli left is in a weak position. What fascinates me in watching this is that the role of social networks, social media, in this particular flare-up of the Israel-Palestine conflict, it has me thinking rather a lot. We are celebrating the centenary of the outbreak of the Great War. There is a British Empire cemetery in Gaza with both British and Indian war dead, and some others from the Second World War, where there is also an Australian military hospital in Gaza. And I suppose I find myself thinking of the anti-war poems and novels that came out of the trenches. The film pictures of the trenches, sort of the live feed from the top of hotels, during the wars, the John Simpson reported wars in the 1990s, and the natural extension now at this moment is Facebook and Twitter.
And millions of iPhones from hotel windows and so on.
It does change, I think, our perception of war. It changes the way we experience war. It brings.
So you see it firsthand. You all of us sitting in Newcastle are feeling
Not edited.
Yes, yes.
It's real time. It's more intuitively verifiable.
Yes,
it presents itself to our senses. We're not asked to believe text. We're seeing images. Which do not seem, at least, to be doctored. They're in real time, and this does seem particularly. I think we were saying earlier that if you look at America, where there has generally been rather a lot of support for the Israeli side in this, which continues and will probably only, if her statements on the hustings are the way she'll govern, would probably continue in a Hillary Clinton presidency. But if you look at people under 30, they're very different. people under 30.
In America?
In America.
So there's two Americas, really?
So they're sort of the coast and Midlands, the red and blue states. But generations are going to, I think, be rather interesting in terms of American policy towards Israel. People under 30 are much more likely to not only sort of get American press, Fox News, etc.,
but also
maybe The Guardian.
Yes.
Or
Yes.
even the BBC.
Yes. So they're more open to new worlds and new ideas and growth.
And
and different points, perspectives.
There's more than one perspective.
Yes, yes.
There are a couple of interesting developments here. So on the one hand, you've got the two Palestinian factions. You've got Hamas, which basically runs Gaza, and the Palestinian Authority, which basically at this point runs the West Bank. At the moment, they're saying from the same hymn sheet. Possibly not the best analogy, but they've reached an accord. There was an accord earlier in the year that fell apart. But at the moment, there's this one coherent Palestinian voice. So that helps in terms of reaching an eventual agreement. What helps less is the fact that Egypt at the moment is quite strongly anti-brotherhood. Of which, of course, Hamas is a daughter organisation. So Egypt's usual role as being able to work out deals and ceasefires.
Yes, like the middleman.
At the moment, it's not playing that role as well as it has in the past because of its quite tense relations with Hamas. And you see that in some of the aid crossings. So you need to get permission from the Egyptians to get into Gaza, and they let in some Turkish medical shipments just a couple of days ago. They're weighing whether to let some humanitarian assistance come from Iran, because of course there are other political issues there which which muddy the humanitarian waters. A third thing, which I think shows why this war is slightly different from previous flare-ups. There's a disasters emergency committee which unites 13 British charities in times of great humanitarian disaster. They've been calling for donations for current humanitarian needs in Gaza. 11 of the 13 are working there. In 2009, the BBC said that they wouldn't run their adverts and pleas for donations, saying that would be taking a side in the Israel-Palestine conflict. In 2014, 5 years later, the BBC is supporting that appeal and publicising it. So I think that shows, in a way, how this one's different. The need is more urgent.
Strip for Palestine.
Strip for Israel. Sorry.
Strip for Israel.
Yes.
I mean, what kind of depravity is this? You want to show your bits and bobs, I'll pay you. Why do you want to do it in the name of Israel?
But I mean, getting back, I think, to the humanitarian point. I mean, you're completely right. I mean, I think the UN's latest numbers are 9,400 have been wounded.
9,400 people in this recent conflict in 4 weeks.
1,880 it probably is the best number for Palestinians who've been killed. 80 to 85% of them have been civilians.
How much?
80 to 85% of those civilians. Those are the UN's estimates. And then on top of that, you've got 273,000 people who are displaced, and 138 schools and 26 medical facilities.
Many of those will die, won't they? Just in the getting out, so they maybe don't count in the killed bit.
Right, and Paddy, in your learned opinion, where do you think those people are living now, the ones whose house or 200 buildings are smashed?
Well, quite a few are in the remaining schools. I mean, those are being used to house people whose domiciles have...
I would love a favour of you. Tomorrow we are doing 12 midday to 12 midnight map, medical aid for Palestine, as you saw at the BMW garage we talked about. I'd like a photo of those stats so I can read them out tomorrow. And you're welcome if you're here between 12 noon and 12 midnight. Please come and talk about it. And I think blasphemy is used as a weapon of mass destruction. I think it is.
Yes, and often it's used to settle to pursue disputes that are often commercial or vendettas in
Yes.
another field.
Yes.
And if one of the people happens not to be a Sunni Muslim, then you make an accusation of blasphemy.
And then you can't defend it.
Yes.
I used to be quite anti-gay, coming from India, from a traditional Hindu household. And over time I've got to know them. This fellow comes from Northern Symphonia. He used to play an instrument. And says, Doc, I've fallen in love. Is she? I can't whistle, my mouth is dry. I said, like sexy looking and all. No, he's got a lovely beard. So I closed my eyes. And he said, why are you closing your eyes? I said, I'm metamorphosing my image of what I would love from yours. He said,
By adding a beard.
by adding a beard. Yes. No, but you
only go for bearded women.
But over time.
She won the Eurovision.
Yes,
didn't she?
yes.
Was it Emma's the from?
What did you call her? No, but her voice is beautiful. Listen, the best singer in India used to be Lata Mangeshkar, and she's not the best thing since sliced bread. You are prettier than her. She's quite ugly. She's popped. No, that's not our first language.
They don't do that in Bollywood.
Yeah, well, no, Bollywood is only recent. Father
They
of
live
Bless.
happily ever after.
Yeah, of course they do. And all the enemies are all white, The foreign,
Sorry about that.
the foreign.
In Indian politics, we had this anti-corruption party doing quite well in municipal elections.
Anna Hazare and Aam Aadmi Party.
Then perhaps not doing as well when it spread and started taking on issues, however well-meaning, other than corruption. It was doing reasonably well as
So would you say they were too inexperienced, too young to expand that fast?
Well, when you have other things going on, when you've got sort of, with in the last election with issues including sectarianism sort of floating around, you have to somehow address that, and that becomes a very dicey water to wade into when you've just been talking about corruption. When the National Democratic Alliance came to power in May with a quite big majority, it said it went into sort of a thinking period, taking stock, and I think it's been quite cautious. We haven't really seen interesting leadership taking coming out of Modi and out of the new government, and I was quite hoping that with Sharif replacing what also was a rather sclerotic government from the last year.
So both sides were quite paralyzed before these two elections. Yeah.
Well, Zardari had one thing that he was trying to do, which was to see out a 5-year term, and he did that, and not a whole lot else.
Yeah. So just keep the seat going for 5 years. Yeah.
And he warmed his seat, and he really didn't actually campaign that hard to keep it after. Sharif came to power, and and was talking very strongly about his core constituency. There were businessmen in the Punjab.
Yes.
And he was talking quite a lot about growing the rather sclerotic Pakistan economy through trade with India, normalising ties with India. Even appointing a chief of army staff who maybe would be less inclined than his predecessors to see India as necessarily
an enemy,
but perhaps to look at sort of counter-terrorism operations as something that the army should not feel ashamed about doing, and perhaps that is an equally valorous enemy for the Pakistani army to take on as Indian generals, and there was. I think that you could sense this great possibility that India and Pakistan ties would move forward.
Move their friendship together.
And with new governments, both in Delhi and Islamabad, and trade and prosperity would come out of that. And I'm not sure that's happened yet.
Or not to the extent it could have happened.
There have been
How could India and Pakistan improve their relation, or at least stop killing each other? And being so suspicious all the time, both sides.
Well, it's
from your understanding.
Yes, it's partly a matter of cultivating a political constituency for trade, prosperity, and peace. Whereas you will always have people. There's a strong nationalist vein in both countries, and you can very easily tap into it and to be
make the other side the enemy, even if they're not. Yeah. Yes.
I mean, you have spoilers. You have the. The ongoing sort of case of the Mumbai bombings. You've got the settlement in Afghanistan, which places a certain tradition of strategic thought in Pakistan on the opposing side of Delhi. You still have people who think in the Pakistani security establishment in terms of strategic depth, and that somehow the next kind of time that 74 comes around, that Pakistan can just sort of draw back into Afghanistan and run away from the advancing onslaught of the Indian army. And a tendency to cultivate, factions within Afghanistan as proxy contestation. It is one of the buggers of that bit of the world that, in a way, and though there are other issues at work, but settling Afghanistan also requires settling Kashmir. Once
so it's a thorn in the side of both countries, really.
Yes, once India and Pakistan are no longer viewing Afghanistan as an area to contest by proxy, or elements within both countries, within both states, then you might actually have a reasonable chance of some form of coherent government taking the role that will be left vacant when finally the last US forces draw out in 2016. These are terribly and fiendishly linked strategic conundra.
They're not simple. What if the two governments of India and Pakistan just accept the bits they have and say that is it, we accept? So, because what's happening now, in my little understanding, is India treats Kashmir as a very special case. It's not just another state of India. It's special. And I think Pakistan also has a prime minister in Pakistan. So each side is treating it like a girlfriend and shouldn't run away. What if each side marries that girlfriend and says, you're mine, you're theirs, and both countries accept that the line of control is actually an international border? Because we are both sides losing so much money in trade and film shooting. What do you think?
I think an eventual settlement, along the line of control would work quite well for both
I'm
sides.
sure neither party wants it. India wants all of it and Pakistan wants all of it. But suppose you say, no, this is it. That's agreed.
There's the third bloc, the Kashmiris. They want it as an independent state. I've heard some of that along the line.
If you say that, there'll be phone calls in a minute.
But for there to be that sort of settlement, you would need both countries to be willing to incur great
and a lot more trust and friendship has to start.
And substantial political costs at home. A peace deal, a lasting one, would require both countries to fight their own nationalists, and it would be a very bruising battle, Whereas at the moment, in the Pakistani context, the security establishment looks to the militant groups who are operating on the other side.
It enjoys them and has a friendship.
It sees them as a reliable ally to then send into Afghanistan. It would require cutting ties with them. These are very pricey acts which require more political commitment on both sides.
Both sides, of course.
We could possibly imagine.
Yes.
And the costs that would be paid would be quite short term, and the benefits.
Long term is wonderful. Yes. Exactly what we are thinking. India has lost its soul, I feel.
Which is interesting. A country that which has got extraordinary kudos, and which we tend in the West to view positively, and in a way that tends to be spiritual. We think of the Beatles going off and
getting something from it
with Ravi Shankar. And that goes forwards. I mean that goes back to the romantic movement becoming involved, and shanti in the wasteland. And even today, my female friends sort of going off to do yoga in India on their holiday breaks, which is interesting for a country which is poor, with a growing middle class that has supported India's shining and the BJP, which is preoccupied in its daily life with very bread and butter, or perhaps kind of necessities that in the West we would view it as sort of
you haven't got food to eat, what are you talking about God kind of thing, attitude from here.
And going back to social media, it is interesting that dynastic politics in South Asia has not fared very well, has not adapted very well. So Rahul Gandhi didn't have a website in the last election, didn't have a Twitter account or a Facebook account. He did not occupy the digital sphere at all. if you look to the Bhutos, who fared hideously, enormously badly, and basically just gave up and
so they haven't adapted to modern technology at all. They're still living on the old glories of sitting on the throne and smiling.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Kind of, yes.
I think social media will be very disruptive in terms of dynastic politics.
Yes, thank God for that.
We've seen it in the last elections, both in India and in Pakistan, where where Bilawal sort of had a notion that he'd eventually stand.
This is late Mrs. Bhutto's son.
Yes.
I noticed I didn't say Zardari's son. There's a reason why. But carry on, Mr. Bilawal.
But the family house, which
what
occupies named after him.
But why should we have dynastic politics at all,
But he was going to hang out in the Gulf where it was safer and contest, a very, very rough but safe constituency within Karachi.
But sitting in the Gulf.
But sitting in the Gulf, and he had this idea that he'd campaign by internet. He'd go on YouTube. And this is what characterized, the omni shambles of the Bhutto
But both the sides, it's not there, wasn't there? Such range. What did you make of it, Paddy?
It is amazing. It is really amazing what you've done there. It's the fifth birthday. Was that it?
Fifth birthday of the Asian Business Connections.
And you've created an enormous amount of new business here. I'm particularly stunned by what you're doing in mentoring and work experience.
With real people, and today is also Spice's 6th birthday.
Happy birthday.
Baar baar din ye aaye, baar baar dil ye gaaye, tum jiyo hazaron saal ye meri hai arzu. Happy birthday to Spice. Happy birthday to Spice. Happy birthday to Sandeep Kapoor. Happy birthday to you. Ding 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 ding. That's how our shows are. Totally mad.
Gentlemen, I was listening.
In its last years, we're sort of in a policy of paralysis because
policy of paralysis.
It attracts.